is gases turning into small particles, so nucleation type events. The slightly bigger stuff is oxidation, so combustion type aerosols. The slightly bigger stuff is older combustion aerosols, and they've grown bigger. And then the really big stuff on the right-hand side, this sort of super micron stuff, this tends to be due to resuspension of dust, mechanical stuff. So as you drive your car kicks up this dust. As you kick the ground, that kicks up dust. So it tends to be from that side. But that size distribution can be super useful to saying where the sources come from. And that's a well-run, well-walked road. We know how this does it. If you just click one forward, please. So the trouble is the big picture is what we can measure, and that's what we can measure if we've got the big bits of kit. We've got the lots of money. But the bit we can measure with low-cost particles is just that in the red. So the particle sensors tend to be optical, and that means we can measure from anywhere from about 300 nanometers up to tens of microns. And so the question we asked ourselves about 5 years ago is, could you use that information there to do the source apportionment? And the answer is yes. So to cut a long story short, the answer is yes. So using this information, we can start to separate different pollution sources out. So if you go to the next slide, please. Okay, so I'll do 4 case studies. I'll do 1 case study with K-means, and then I'll do 3 case studies with either PMF or NMF. And so the first one will be in Nigeria, and there might be some from Ili-Ife. I've spelt it wrong there, so it's Ili-Ife, not Ife-Ife. So we'll go to that one first, okay? So next slide, please. Okay, so this is data taken from a previous study. I don't know if anyone's in the audience from the this evening rush hour peak, which stretches out into the night. And typically, you know, that's very often seen all over the world, that the morning rush hour has quite a well-defined time period, whereas the evening kind of blends later into the night. We've also got this very clear daytime peak in there. And so that looks like wind-blown dust. So something to do with that. And then we've got these other ones, which actually all look relatively similar. There's some differences in there. And then we've got the size profiles of these things. So again, this is a bit more of a connoisseur's bit. So I won't talk about those too much, but that's how the different size distributions look. So if you go to the next slide, please. And so what we can do algorithmically is we've got these 5 sites. Again, steel mill is there. Got the first site, well, first 2 sites there and there. And just to make life easy, daytime signal for construction site. And then the really useful bit, and I think this is where there's great potential going forward, is we can look at how the amount of PM10 in this case, because it's construction dust, we worry about the big particles the most. We can see how much dust comes during this is working hours during the daytime, and this is non-working hours. And so this is the polar plot. So essentially the hotter the color, the more pollution that's coming. And what we can see is outside of working hours, the pollution is a lot less from construction, as you would expect logically, but it's nice to show that the model is working. And then when we go to the daytime, we see that the construction is causing pollution to the east and also to the southwest. So clearly on this construction site, when we were monitoring, there was something coming from this direction and there was something coming from this direction here. So it seems to work remarkably nicely. And you've got this marriage between regulation and the polluter. And so I think if we make the argument well enough, is we can get the regulators to start mandating that people do this type of work, because it can then let you know who is causing the pollution. But also from a polluter's point of view, they don't want to be causing pollution. You know, they want to have healthy air as well. And so this also gives them information about at what points they're polluting and if they can do something to mitigate against that. So the next slide, please. So this is, how am I doing for time, by the way, Dan? Plenty of time, okay. 10, 15 minutes, okay. So I'll do one more example here. So this is another example in the UK, but there'll be plenty of quarries in West Africa as well. So again, what we have here is there's a quarry here, a relatively small town village here who are always very worried about how much air pollution is coming from the quarry. So from a commercial point of view, the quarry wants to quarry more and more, pull more and more stuff out the ground. And by one estimate, that pit is worth about a billion pounds. It's the amount of material that they can pull out if they're allowed to pull all the stuff they want to pull out. And if you remember, one of these sensors costs, I don't know, a couple of $100, right? So from a commercial point of view, if you can show that you can help them measure what they're doing, that cost is small at this point. So again, very similar. So we managed to split it into 4 factors. Click along, please. And so again, what we have is we can go over these different factors. Again, we have this very typical regional air pollution signal in there, and then we have these quarrying type activities. So we've clicked to the next slide. And so again, we can look at the diurnal factors. Again, we've got some which are active only during the day, so that looks like quarrying activity, and some which look more regional and have urban background in it as well. If we go to the next slide, please. And again, from a thinking about looking at working hours and non-working hours, we can do the same trick here. The predominant wind direction in the UK is from the southwest, by the way. So that's where most of our air masses come from. And for the and luckily for the company, and they were happy with this, we weren't prejudiced, but what it shows is actually the quarry doesn't make a huge amount of difference to the overall PM levels as you go through. So again, from a commercial point of view, yes, it's higher, but for the amount of time it's happening, there's only very few events there. So actually the quarry was relatively happy. Again, this has been signed to fresh emissions from combustion activities. Okay, and then the final one, lots of NO2, lots of ozone, lots of intensity during the daylight hours, low and so it looks very much likely to be at least highly influenced by biomass burning in the surrounding regions. So you can start to get out these different factors. So again, if we were to start thinking about as a air quality regulator, how are we going to solve air pollution in Kinshasa? So chances are you're not going to look at factor 3 to start off with, because you're going to have very little chance to do something about that, at least in the short term. But you've got this, maybe the traffic one. So your traffic authority can do something about that. So you've got more chance to do something about that one. So you can start to pick your battles about where you want to reduce air pollution. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'll do one indoor, I'll do one indoor case study, and I'll see how much time we have then, whether or not I'll go any further. Okay. So if we go to the next one, please. So this is in a UK school. So this is in Wales. So Wales is close to Birmingham, but it's a relatively polluted part of the UK, especially South Wales. If we go to the next slide, please. Okay, so what we've done in this one, so we've got this school. It's quite close to Cardiff, for those of you who know the UK, or it's in Cardiff, I should say. And we've measured inside the classrooms in 3 classrooms. So there's one here. So this is a religious education classroom. So you wouldn't expect too much pollution in there. And then we've got a English classroom there. So you wouldn't expect too much pollution in there. And then we've got a cooking classroom. So you might expect a bit more pollution because there's this cooking influence in there. Okay. And so just looking at the time series in the PM1, PM2.5, PM10. And the nice thing my student did here was he looked at the week when the students were in class and then they were on their Easter holiday. So you've got this on-off period. So you've measured it in there for a week where students are present. And you can see already very clearly in the PM10, lots of students causing lots of dust. And then you go into the following week and there's no one there. Okay. So we run the NMF on this. So we run the source apportionment on this. So go to the next slide, please. and click yes. So what we did here, so we found three dominant sources in these classrooms. So we analyzed them all together. So we did do it independently, but for the final analysis, we analyzed all three classrooms all together. So the three sources had to be present in the three classrooms. And so we had one indoor source and we found two outdoor sources. And so what we are interested in here is, where does the students' pollution, their exposure to pollution, come from? Is it because of the outdoor air coming into the classrooms, or is it because of the pollution generated in the classroom is where they're doing? And in the UK, and I'm sure it's similar here, is students are in school for about 6-7 hours a day. So this is a major source of their exposure during their young lives. And so if we look at the PM1, so we've used the source apportionment to separate PM1 into indoor and outdoor factors. And what we can see is in all classrooms, most of the PM1 is coming from outdoor sources, which is black. The red ones are the indoor sources. So most of PM1 is due to the ingress of outdoor air coming in. So if you wanted to reduce PM1 exposure, then it's a question of creating better filtration. If we go to the next slide, we'll look at PM 2.5. So there's PM 2.5. And so what we see once we get to PM 2.5, we start to get much more of an indoor signal, at least in the classroom 1 and classroom 2. Interestingly, classroom 3 is the cooking classroom, but actually that's far less used. So whereas these classrooms have classes in it every hour of every day, the cooking classroom is actually not used so much. And so you can see this clear influence of just children being in the classroom, 30 children in the classroom kicking up dust. And the other interesting thing is these rooms have carpets and this room has a hard floor. And so in terms of particulate matter, carpets are filthy, horrible things. So they kick up lots and lots of dust. And if we look at PM10, same thing again, but it's very clear that all the PM10 near enough is due to indoor sources, and it's mainly resuspension of dust. So you can use this source apportionment to really get this information out very clearly. And so again, now we can start giving the school ideas about how to reduce their air pollution and how to make their learning outcomes of their students better. Okay, so is that about time, Dan? Do you reckon about time? Okay, so I was going to give you one example of using mobile data, but I'll just click over this. So essentially we've done the same thing, but walked around the city, but done the source apportionment on that mobile data, but it is beginning to sound, and we can show where in the city the air pollution comes from. So the nice thing is we can find out where your exposure is as you walk through the city. And then we can use machine learning, etc., to work out where your exposure is and which sources are most responsible for that pollution. But I'll leave that for you to look at in your own time. And the final real bit of science I want to do, because I haven't talked much about machine learning yet, is we got this other project. And so this is looking at bioaerosols, looking at pollen. And the reason we're interested in pollen is because of the respiratory illnesses, but maybe you'll be more interested in spores in West Africa. But using similar methodology to think about where the sources come from, we can start to look at, can we actually work out how much pollen there is? And this is a really impressive result, I think, from my students. So the thing about pollen is it's a real needle in a haystack. I don't know if that you have the same metaphor in West Africa, but this is, a very small number of things. And pollen from a number concentration, there's hardly any of it, but you can straight away see that the blue and the yellow is the model versus reality, and you start to do very well. So if you start to incorporate these machine learning things on top, you can start to do really impressive source apportionment. So with that, I'll just really conclude. So I've given you lots of examples. I hope it's clear that source apportionment can be done with low-cost sensors, and it's really important to start to know where your sources are coming from and their relative importance.